that was loud. Hey, everyone. Let me mess with the sound here a little so it doesn't blow my eardrums. So, if you're ever thinking about starting a podcast, there's this website called Audio Jungle, and that's where I got this song from. You know, there's a lot of things like this, just beats, instrumentals, a lot of sounds too, actually. If I, look up tennis sounds, there's balls hitting the floor, people serving, people grunting. It's really cool. You can do a lot with it. So go on Audio Jungle, and you can just, they let you buy, I think this song cost me like $3 or something, and you can reuse it for as many times as you want. Really cool. But anyway, so let's get into it here. I'm excited to talk about another set of rules that, I actually put out a little Instagram poll. Maybe like 12 people responded, I think. But hey, that's fine. And I asked, does anyone want me to research the foot fault rules or look into whether or not you can cuss on the court? And obviously, we know the answer to the cuss on the court thing, right? And we also sort of know the answer to the football thing. You can't do it. But I thought it would be interesting if everyone does pick the cussing thing to sort of look into it a little more. Like, what is cussing? I hope the rules get into that. What's the penalties for it, right? Because that's important. So when you're looking at rules, if you're not focusing also on what are the penalties, then you're not truly understanding the rule. Because maybe, especially in the law, maybe there's a different rule that you want your client to be to violate, right? I mean, not to violate, but to be found guilty of. Like, if they get found guilty of this one, it comes with X plus 2. But if they get found guilty of this other little one, it's only X punishment. So the punishments are important to look at. So long story short, the Instagram followers that followed me and voted ended up choosing cussing. And so I looked into it. And that's what I'm going to be doing here a little. And I will say that the answer is pretty simple. Obviously, like I said before, you can't cuss on the court. But we don't really know what that means, right? Does it mean you can't flip someone off? Does it mean you can't mumble under your breath? A cuss word, can you mumble in different languages? Right? There's a lot of open questions that I didn't know before researching this. And to be a little honest, I feel the more I get into these rules, I'm a little unsatisfied with them, the complexity of them or the way they're written. I'm not trying to be all, I don't know, rude about it, I guess, because I didn't make this podcast to be like that, which is why I intentionally try to talk about nice things, family things, good things. But I can't help but just feel like these rules sometimes get a little confusing. And even if they're not confusing, I can't help but feel that they're not fully giving me the answer that I'm looking for. You'll see when I get into it, today regarding the cussing rule. So I won't go into a crazy tangent like last time. If you listen to my last YouTube and this one, I'm going to try to put this one on Spotify. So I'm not going to reference videos like I did last time, which made me not able to put it on Spotify. But this one I'm going to edit after with some pictures, maybe throw the rules up on the screen for you if you're watching on YouTube. And if you're listening in Spotify, it's going to be fine. You're not missing anything really. But like I said, last time I went on a crazy tangent about the ITF rules and who made up the ITF and the Titanic. It was pretty nuts, actually, when I listened to it later. I'm like, what am I talking about? But I just was interested in the little extra things, so that's why I kept going off. The only little tangent I'm going to go off on here is the more we get into these rules, the more you need to understand the book. It's called The Friend at Court. And like I said, you can look it up on the USTA website. It's called The Friend at Court. And I guess it's your friend at court, like on the tennis court, I guess. So even the name's a little confusing to me. But you can find, it seems like every year they're sort of updating it. And so it's important to get the latest updated version, the 2023 Friend at Court, within that book, The Friend at Court, and I tried to explain this last time, but I'm understanding it even more the more I look into more rules, because I didn't really get it. Last time is the first time I ever opened that book, about a week ago. The more I open the book and understand it, I'm now understanding it better, where the book has the ITF rules, the rules that are sort of there for the ITF tournaments, the pro players. The book has USTA rules for us, the league matches, and probably the rules that would apply, the USTA rules would apply to our friendly matches too, like, matches that you set up with a friend. I guess you can make up any rules you want, right? Because it's technically not USTA regulated. That would be interesting, right? Sort of make up your own street rules before you go into a tennis match. I like that, actually. I never thought about that. But the other confusing part with this Friend at Court book is there's something called the code. And it's right in the middle of the book, I think, if I remember how it is, because I only look it up digitally. But there's this thing called the code. And it's like, that thing really throws me off, because it is providing, it's providing more information beyond what the rules are. But that's actually a little scary too, if you think about it. I don't like that. If I can't look at the penal code to see what I violated when I'm, driving and doing something wrong, and I have to look at a different book, that's a little scary. It's scary for the people who might violate those rules, because it's not clear. That's scary when rules aren't clear. It's also scary for the lawyers who are defending those people, because I think there's different ways to interpret things when there's multiple sources to look at, okay? So I think it's a little confusing, but, again, this is my tangent part, so I apologize, and I am going to get into the cussing part, which won't take long. But there's a little preface or preface. I'm not really sure how you say it. I always called it a preface. But the preface is, it says the code. Remember, I'm telling you about the code? There's 3 parts to the Friend at Court: ITF rules, USTA regulations and rules, and the code. And it says in the code is not part of the ITF rules. Players must follow the code, except to the extent which an official assumes some of their responsibilities. Okay, that's a little weird to me already. And then it says the principles in the code apply in cases not specifically covered by the ITF rules or the USTA regulations. Okay, so again, there's these ITF rules, there's these USTA regulations, and then they're admittedly telling us that those are sort of lacking in some respects because they had to draft this thing called the code. And there's literally a line in the code that says the principles in the code apply in cases not specifically covered by the ITF rules and USTA regulations. Again, it's a little confusing. I'm still trying to get it. Hopefully someone maybe will school me one day and explain why this is done this way. But when you read the code, it's helpful if you just read the code by itself, because it goes into sportsmanship policy. It goes into things like that. And there's a paragraph in there that talks about the unwritten rules and tradition of tennis. That stuff's important, right? Because tennis is a fun game. It's a community game. You get to know your neighbor kind of thing. But again, it doesn't help my brain when I'm trying to find an answer to a question, and I don't like, there's some thing here that says, here's the unwritten rules. It's like, wow, that's messing with my brain. Okay, so let's get past the tangent. Let's now go into, when I opened up that Friend at Court, I like looking at the digital version, obviously, because I can Control F, right? So I go Control F on my keyboard, and I start Control effing things. Sorry, that sounded bad. I started to Control F things like cussing, cursing, flagrant, misconduct, unsportsmanlike conduct, code violations, all these things, right? Because I don't want to miss something. I can look at the book fresh each time and go page 1, page 2, page 3, but I choose to Control F these types of things first to see like where I'm going, to try to make sure I'm not missing anything if I'm just skimming, right? And it's a couple hundred pages, this Friend at Court. So you can't really do that every time. So I started to Control F. I almost messed that up again. And I started finding the words that I thought, okay, I want to focus on these: unsportsmanlike conduct. Then there's something called misconduct, sort of the same, right? A little confusing. The point penalty system, like what's going to happen when you do this bad thing. And then I do want to touch on the hindrance rules just a little, because I think it's a good background going into then the misconduct. But let me get into that. But that was sort of the thought process and the research process that I went to for this particular one. So hopefully by the end of this, we'll find out the basic question of, can we cuss on the court? Like I said, we sort of all know the answer, but it's good to sort of read the rules out loud, for me to look at them all, to see what the penalties are, to see how those rules apply. Like I said at the beginning, I think we're all going to be a little unsatisfied because it doesn't help answer some very specific questions that I had. Like if I gave an example of someone doing something on the court, I couldn't necessarily find the answer here. And I hate that. And if it's going to be up to the interpretation of the ref, that's tough, right? Because one person might say this, the other person might say this, and I don't like that kind of stuff. Anyways, let's go a little into the hindrance rules. We all sort of know, like, the hindrance, right? An example of that, you can't talk during the point. Okay, so that doesn't necessarily match up with cussing, right? That's different. And we were sort of assuming people are cussing not in the middle of swinging, right? When I was thinking about someone cussing on the court, I wasn't necessarily thinking someone in the middle of a serve saying, "Yeah, son of a," that kind of thing. It was more like talking trash on the changeover, or if someone hits a lucky shot, you cuss them out, things like that. But I did find it interesting that the hindrance issues and the hindrance rules apply. There is hindrance issues with talking during points. Okay, so I think there's ways there to even get you sort of busted when you're talking, even if it's not cussing, right? That goes into the hindrance rule. So I didn't really research that enough, but I thought it was important to at least bring up. I found some other hindrance rules about body movement. Okay, now the only reason, again, I'm bringing this up is because later on I'm going to talk to you about gestures. Oh, I almost did it. Did I do it on camera? I might have done it subconsciously. But gestures, where is that misconduct, unsportsmanlike conduct kind of thing? So the hindrance issues or the hindrance rules also touch on body movement. And it says, like, a player may feint with their body while the ball is in play. However, other things like waving your arms, it says stamping your feet. I don't know, maybe I'm a moron. I always say stomping. I don't know, maybe now I realize it sounds dumb. But it says these things aren't allowed. Stamping your feet, waving your arms, but player fainting the body, that's okay, right? That makes sense. So a lot of these things do make sense. And I always say this too, in my world of law, like, a lot of the rules just make sense. They're common sense. There's only some nuance to some, very particular rules. Talk under the hindrance issues a little more, I'll just touch on this again. There's some parts that talk about unintentional acts versus intentional acts. I like focusing on that a little too prior to getting into the cussing, because it helps me understand sort of where the USTA's brain was when they were drafting these regulations. The unintentional whoops versus the intentional act. Obviously, the cussing's going to be more on the intentional side. Okay, so this is just all good stuff for us to understand. And each time you research a rule, you want to sort of get this other stuff just to make sure you're really understanding the whole world of the rule you're researching. So I like that. I like looking into the hindrance stuff. I like looking into what is the code a little more, just to see if I can help give myself sort of a background coming into this very new, right? Coming into this where I've only known this book exists for a week, even though I've been playing tennis literally my whole life. Maybe you feel the same way, right? It's like, have any of you ever looked in the USTA regulations? Maybe some of you have. Do you even know there's a book out there called Friend at Court? Again, I didn't. Okay, so I'm staying away now from the code. I'm going straight to the USTA regulations part of the Friend at Court book. Obviously, these are the ones that apply to us. the USTA tournaments we play, and obviously the league matches that we play. Okay. So I'm going to throw out some things here. And then at the end, I'm hoping to sort of bring it all home, because I'm going to throw out just some parts at you. And then it's going to answer some questions, but then it's sort of just like giving you parts of the recipe, and you're not truly understanding what it is. And at the end, hopefully we'll just put it all together, right? And it'll make sense, or it'll make the thing we want to make. So under the USTA regulations, there's a section for referee responsibilities after the draw is made, right? So after the draw is made, the seedings, etc., there was this section called defaulting players. And so again, thought this was interesting, right? So if we're trying to understand cussing, we're trying to understand the penalties of cussing, it's nice to read more information about the ref's responsibilities, and when can't they default people. So that's why I specifically cut and paste this particular part of the USTA regulations. So it says default players. The referee may default a player. Okay, that says may. Okay, that's another interesting thing in the law. I always tell people when I'm trying to explain to them a particular code or rule, does the rule say must? Does the rule say may? Okay, this one says may. Sounds like it's a choice for the ref if it says may. You don't have to, right? The referee may default a player for cause, which includes but is not limited to tardiness, comma, and here's the one that applies to us, misconduct, on court or off court. Ooh, off court also. Interesting. So that's good to know. The ref has the responsibility, or may have the responsibility, to default us when we do certain things on or off the court. All right, good. So continuing with the USTA regulations, there's a section called conducting the tournament. And there's tables there. This got a little confusing to me too. I think the point of the tables were trying to sort of give the reader a summary, and sort of, you know how tables are. Sometimes they'll explain it to you in paragraph form, but then give you a table. So it's not necessarily in conflict with the paragraph parts, but to me, it got a little confusing. But anyway, so let's go to table 10 under default. Okay, a little more about the defaults. It says a default occurs when an official defaults a player under the point penalty system. Okay, good. I mentioned that at the beginning, right? The point penalty system. But now this is sort of the first instance when I was looking into it where it's referencing that. So now I understand the referee's job about how they may default us for certain misconduct we do. But the default occurs when an official defaults someone under the point penalty system. So to understand cussing, I have to understand the point penalty system, it sounds like. I have to know, what is it, right? I mean, obviously, point penalty system, right? So we all know point taken away, game, set, match. Is that how it goes? I don't know. Let's get into it, right? Okay, so that's that. Now there's a section called unsportsmanlike conduct. All right. This is now sounding like the section that I want to see and read and understand when I think about someone cussing someone out on the court. Or I said cussing someone out. How about just cussing out loud? Okay. And so I'm going to try to bring up some examples at the end, and maybe, if you're interested in emailing me or responding on YouTube or whatever, or Instagram, and giving me some examples yourself where this has happened, but I still can't figure out all the answers based on this stuff, but let's try. Unsportsmanlike conduct by player or person associated with player. Okay, that's sentence number 1. And I want to read it again, okay? Under the unsportsmanlike conduct section in the USTA regulations, there's a sentence in paragraph 11, it's numbered 11, that says unsportsmanlike conduct by player or person associated with player. That's pretty interesting, right? So you can have an unsportsmanlike conduct of you or an unsportsmanlike conduct of someone associated with me, my coach, my significant other, my kid, my friend, right? So that's pretty interesting. And it says a player who enters a sanctioned tournament or match consents to being penalized under the point penalty system. Okay, there's that point penalty system again. That includes conduct by a person associated with the player. All right. I never quite got the answer to this question, but obviously that makes us think about what if our buddy on the side of the court is cussing at the top of their lungs? Can I be penalized for that under the point penalty system? It says persons who are unsportsmanlike may be asked by any member of the tournament committee or any official representative of the tournament to desist and / or to leave the tournament site, and they must comply. This last sentence I read obviously applies to that other person associated with the player, right? That friend, that coach. Again, I still don't understand the penalty to it. If my coach stands up and is literally cursing out the other player, they can be asked to leave, but what effect does it have on me? So I don't know the answer yet. I don't think it's ever answered to just give you the end result. I don't see it. But it is interesting to sort of see that play out. And I guess it sort of makes common sense that person would be asked to leave. They must comply per the rules. But it shouldn't go on me, right? I probably shouldn't receive a point penalty because some jerk, even the jerk that I know, outside the court is cussing out my opponent or just cussing constantly. I guess that sort of makes sense. Okay, so now let's focus on us. Okay, that was sort of the person, as the rules state, associated with the player. Again, we still don't have an answer to the question, but that's okay. Let's move on. Let's talk about us. Paragraph 18 in the USTA regulation says, a player shall not engage in unsportsmanlike conduct. Okay, paragraph 11 already sort of told us that. A player can't do it. A person associated with the player can't do it. Now, paragraph 18 focuses specifically on the player. The player shall not engage in unsportsmanlike conduct. To go on further with the rule, a player shall not at any time, in parentheses, on or off court, close parentheses, engage in a verbal abuse, swear at an official, a spectator, or an opponent in a voice that can be heard by any person. Okay, I got to break this down. And if you listen to the first video I did on rules, I touched on this briefly about breaking down the definition or breaking down a rule or a penal code and looking at the elements of that rule. And remember how I said, if there's 3 parts to that rule that you need to violate, if you've only violated 2 parts of that rule, you didn't violate the rule. And so it's important to break down and dissect the definition, each definition. All right. So I'm going to read this full sentence again. Hopefully, when I edit this stuff, I'll be able to put it on the screen. But for the Spotify people, it says a player shall not. Okay, remember that's important. That's an important stop already. A player shall not means you can't. Okay, it doesn't mean you may or may not. It says you cannot. A player shall not at any time. Then it says on or off court. So you can't do the stuff they're going to tell you about next, on or off court. You can't do it. A player shall not at any time, on or off court, engage in verbal abuse. Okay? Verbal abuse, and they don't give us a real definition for it, which I don't like. Swear at an official, a spectator, or an opponent in a voice that can be heard by any person. Okay. Before I get into that last part of that can be heard by any person, I want to address this verbal abuse, swear at official, swear at a spectator part of the definition. Because like I said, without, I guess, case law to explain definitions and rules, the rules are left up to interpretation. That's why there is rules, penal codes, but also that's why lawyers look at the cases where the judges interpreted those rules or codes, right? So now we understand why case law is important in the law, Because when you just look at this definition, you don't know still what swearing at an official is. You have a common sense idea of what it is, right? I can probably name 5 cuss words right now that I think we'll probably all agree on is swearing at an official. But we still don't know if saying jerk, okay, because I'm trying to keep this PG, right, on my podcast, is jerk verbal abuse? If I call the referee a jerk, is that swearing at the official? If I say, what if I just make fun of them? If I say I don't even know a good make fun thing right now that's PG, but let's just totally, if I say you don't know how to cook, like, I don't know, my mind's always on food, right? Is that verbal abuse? Is that swear? It's probably not swearing, okay? Because I don't think anyone would interpret that as swearing. But what if there is a ref that thinks that's swearing? See, this is why the interpretation of the definitions is so important. But again, we're going to be missing it because there is no court of law for the USTA regulations. I guess all we can really do is sort of look at what pro tournaments have done, but that's ITF stuff. Okay, I'm going maybe too long with this one sentence, but it's the way my brain works. I hope it's helpful to start the sentence over and then to talk about the end of that sentence. A player shall not at any time on or off court, okay, off court as well, engage in verbal abuse, swearing at an official or at a spectator. All right? Totally makes sense to me, that part. Can't just cuss out loud. Can't cuss at your opponent. You can't say the F word at your official. You can't say the F word at a spectator, right? Those are easy. But again, like I said, it still doesn't answer the question of what is a cuss word? What is verbal abuse? Now we're going to the end of the sentence, which I think is even also a little more confusing. It says you can't do these things, which is engaging in verbal abuse, swearing at the official or spectator, or an opponent, right? You can't engage in these things in an opponent, in a voice that can be heard by any person. Okay. It's a little confusing, but also I think if we give an example, it sort of makes perfect sense. And now I sound like an idiot that it's confusing, but makes perfect sense. But that's what happens when you do a podcast without a script. You just sometimes sound like an idiot, and I apologize. But the end of the sentence says you can't do these things to an opponent in a voice that can be heard by any person. So this is why I think sometimes we see in tournaments, which I guess the USTA or pro tournaments, and the USTA obviously agrees, that if someone is cussing way back there in their court, but a ref hears it, the ref might tell the line judge, or the line judge hears it, the line judge might tell the ref and assess some sort of penalty. And it's like, why? The pro's like, what are you doing? Like, I'm just talking, right? But the line judge heard it. So I haven't matched this up to the ITF rules, but if it's USTA and you have someone watching your match outside the fence and you're back there mumbling in the corner, cussing, right? Saying stuff that I think, let's say everyone would agree is a swear word. If it can be heard by any person, even that person outside the gate, okay, that would apply to this rule. We still don't know what the penalty is. This is just telling us what unsportsmanlike conduct is. So remember, like I said, you have to think that way too. What's the problem? What's the penalty? So here we're trying to understand what is unsportsmanlike conduct. Well, you can't swear at an official. You can't swear at a spectator. You can't commit verbal abuse, and you can't swear, curse, in a voice that can be heard by any person, even not your opponent. Okay, and that's applies to the person, or the example I just gave with the person outside the fence. And now that I read this sentence over again in my head, I'm even getting more confused. And if you're watching this, you're like, I'm coming to you for the answers, and you're making me more confused. I am. I apologize. But that's what happens when you read these rules that aren't defined with case law, with answers themselves. That's the problem. But look at this sentence. It says, or an opponent in a voice that can be heard by any person. So here's the confusing part to me now. Does this last sentence only apply if I'm cussing at my opponent, but someone else hears it? Do you understand what I'm saying? Because it says you can't, you player, shall not, can't engage in these things, this swearing, this verbal abuse, or against an opponent in a voice that can be heard by any person. And that whole thing is the end of the sentence without commas. So I can't swear against my opponent, makes sense, but I can't even do it in a voice that can be heard by any person. So how about I'm just back there not swearing at my opponent? I'm swearing at myself. You son of a F and whatever, and someone hears it. Does that fall in this rule? Or the end of this rule? I'm not swearing at an official. I'm not swearing at a spectator. I'm not swearing against my opponent. It is a voice that can be heard by any person. We're pretending the person's outside the fence listening to us and watching our match. But is that unsportsmanlike conduct when I'm swearing against myself? I guess it's verbal abuse. I still don't understand that fully. But let's go on a little more, which, we'll answer this a little better. And then we'll talk about the point and penalty system and hopefully bring all this home. Okay. All right. So sometimes we're just left with more questions, or I'm as we're learning this, it's good to ask more questions and to think of more examples. And you don't necessarily have to come to the right answer yet, but hopefully at the end you will. So next, under, I think still paragraph 18, under B, subheading B, it says visible or audible profanity or obscenity. It says, use profanity or insulting, abusive, or obscene language in any way that may be heard by any person, or use obscene, insulting, or abusive gestures. All right. So this is helping us to define things a little better. And again, obviously, I'm trying to read you the stuff I found in order. And so you're sort of going through the same process I did when I was looking it up. I think it's more helpful that way to sort of break down the research and the process instead of just giving you the end, because I guess I can get on here in 30 seconds and go, here's the answer. But if you're listening and you're interested, it's better to go through it slowly this way. But this sentence I just read helps answer some of the questions I just went over a few minutes ago, right? And it says visible. That's the one we were talking about earlier with hand gestures. Audible, obviously coming out of my mouth, me talking, screaming. Visible or audible profanity or obscenity. Okay. Use profanity or insulting, abusive, insulting. There you go. Remember I said, does jerk apply for verbal abuse? That I think can be considered insulting. So the use of profanity or insulting or abusive or obscene language in any way that may be heard by any person, including abusive gestures. Okay, this definition is good because I think it really gives us a good world of understanding of what is this, what's the answer? Can you cuss? Can you cuss out loud? Can you cuss in the corner? What if someone hears it? Can you make hand gestures? It sounds like all of this stuff is unsportsmanlike conduct. Okay, so at least now I think we're understanding. All of this is unsportsmanlike conduct. We still don't know if a very specific example might fall under insulting. Is jerk insulting? Maybe to one person it's not, maybe to another person it is. That's where it gets a little dicey, okay? But I think you just have to not say things like that. And then if you do, the ref gets to answer that question on the court. All right, so that's a good couple paragraphs about unsportsmanlike conduct. That's good. Let's go into the point penalty system a little and understand what that is. And this one's pretty good. It says the purpose of the system. What's the purpose of this point penalty system? The purpose of the system are to deter unsportsmanlike conduct by a player and persons associated with those players. It gives us some other stuff, but that's the point of it, right? A lot of these things, I call them punishments. You'll find if you are a lawyer, you'll routinely read that these things are never punishments. They're just to simply help deter. It always cracks me up a little, I guess, being a defense lawyer, when they say things like that, because it's obviously a punishment. But you will find that here too. It says these things. Oh, look, it says it right here. I did cut and paste this. The objective of the point penalty system is not to punish, but to secure compliance. Anyways, that's me just bringing up stuff that I have to deal with sometimes. It is to deter unsportsmanlike conduct, of course. It is to secure compliance, but it says it's not to punish. But obviously they must punish. So I never understood why they write things like that. Okay, now this gets a little confusing next, because under the point penalty system paragraphs, they talk about this thing called flagrant violations, because I haven't even told you yet what the point penalty offenses are, right? I haven't told you what happens when you do these unsportsmanlike things. But before I get there, there was a paragraph about flagrant violations. And I was very interested to read that flagrant unsportsmanlike acts by a player or person associated with a player may result in an immediate default. What did I do after I read this paragraph? I instantly Control F'd flagrantly unsportsmanlike, everything I can think of. And there was no other instance of this word coming up. I hate that. There has to be a definition in the rules. The USTA has to add a definition for flagrant. Because if there is a paragraph in the rules that allows a referee to default you for one single act because the referee considers it flagrant, I think that's an issue. It is an issue because one person might consider something flagrant while another person might not. And I don't think that's fair. I just like things to be fair. Fair means applied to everyone the same. And if we don't understand what the word flagrant is, it can't be applied to everyone the same. So that's where I find sometimes you need a definitions portion. And if I'm missing it, actually, if someone knows it, I would really love to hear it. So I don't mind being wrong. I just couldn't find it myself. Okay. Little recap, point penalty system. Here's the point of the point penalty system, or the purpose. That's a better way to say it. The purpose of the point penalty system. There is such things as flagrant violations, which if you do engage in a flagrantly unsportsmanlike act or flagrant violation, you can be immediately defaulted before we even get into the point penalty system. I guess it's still part of the point penalty system, but it's just interesting to read that. All right. Let's go into the table 14 of the point penalty system. In that table, it discusses things called code violations. It discusses things called misconduct. And then it tells us the penalties for these things. Okay, so now we're really getting the answer finally to the question of can you or can't you cuss? Because if there is no punishment to the rule, then let's be real. You can do it. If the rule says you can't cuss, but there's no punishment for cussing, what's going to stop a person from cussing? That's a better way of saying it. I don't mean to say you can do it. What I mean to say is, if there is no punishment, what's stopping a person from doing it? You can't stop it. You can't say, that's not nice. Tradition says you can't do that. So you have to know what applies under the point penalty system. Misconduct is one of those things that apply under the point penalty system. Code violations are. Like, for an example of a code violation, not resuming play within 30 seconds. Okay, we don't have a timer out there. But, if you're playing a match, you feel like they're taking too long, you might call a ref out. You might say, ref, there's a rule I'm sure you're aware of that says that they can't take longer than 30 seconds between points. Time them. They're taking like a minute, right? That's a code violation. There's punishments for code violations. Okay, I didn't research it too much, but I'm just trying to give you an example of that. So now let's look at the penalties for misconduct. It says penalty violations shall be penalized as follows. The first offense, point. The second offense, game. The third offense, default. For some reason, I always thought the third offense was the set, but I guess it's not. It's point, game, match. And now thinking back on it, there's that famous McEnroe, and I forget who he was playing. I don't know if it was US Open or on grass, where he just went nuts and then the match was defaulted. And I don't remember if he might have misunderstood the rule, to tell you the truth also, because I remember the video. I got to find it. But I remember the video where he thought he sort of had another chance to be loud, obnoxious jerk and cuss. And the ref, the referee on the sitting in the high chair just defaulted him, said game match. I got to find that and reference it a little better here. Dang it, I should have researched that before I did this. But anyways, the point penalty violations are as follows. First offense, point. Second offense, game. Third offense, default. Remember, the only other hiccup here is that flagrant violation, which you can be defaulted automatically. I don't know what that is yet, and it never gets answered here. But now we understand. If I'm engaging in misconduct, we now understand what misconduct is when we talked about the working definitions, right? Under the visible and audible profanity and obscenity. We know that you can't do this stuff on the court or on the court. We know you can't do it to an official, to your opponent. You can't even do it to a person who's listening outside the fence. So we now understand all these things are considered misconduct, abuse. Cussing is a form of all this stuff. The audible cussing, the verbal, the gestures, right? The obscene gestures, that's all part of this. You can't do any of it, the rules say. And the penalty is point violation, game violation, or am I saying that right? Yeah. Point, game, default. And if you do something bad enough that's considered flagrant, you can get a default even within the first violation. So I hope that helped you. I tried to keep this one a little shorter. It still ended up being 43 minutes. I apologize for that. But I hope that helped you understand that you cannot cuss on the court. But what is cussing? Anyways. All right. Well, have a great time. And let me do a little song for you. And thanks. See you next time.